saying, you are coming against the people of God. So God doesn't just arbitrarily destroy human life. This is life created in His image. He does it because there is no remedy for that particular life, or because He will be glorified in a different way. You know, if I die today, maybe somebody will come to Christ through my death, okay? There is a purpose for everything that happens. Nothing happens apart from God's sovereignty. But that is the answer I would give those people, is that we're made in God's image, and it doesn't change because we have the New Testament. That doesn't change at all. God's nature about who He is and what He has done in us will never change. And the Great Tribulation proves it. He's going to come back riding on a white horse, and He's going to slay the armies of the world with the breath of His mouth. I mean, you think that this is the peace-loving Jesus that, you know, these liberal churches teach about. They just need to open the Bible and turn to the last chapter. Yes. Oh, I thought you were, oh, okay.
Also, he's working, David was working as the arm of God.
Right.
He defeated the enemy, but when he killed Uriah, he was doing personal vengeance.
Right, and you want to know something? Uriah was what? What was he?
Hittite.
He was a Hittite. He was one of the people that was set for destruction by the land of Canaan, the sons of Heth, right? And yet he was taken into the covenant community. He was a part of the people, and David did wrong. He was, love you, have a nice day, enjoy your boyfriend. Whatever she's doing. I don't. So does that resolve anything there, that discussion, other than the 400 years, which we already got out of the way, about the image of God, about life for life? I mean, you know, and another thing, which Sing Sai brought up, the concept of life for life, is eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. A lot of people say, well, that was unjust, and that was, you know, how can you go and break somebody's tooth out because you broke somebody else's tooth out? That was a just punishment, in that what it did is it restrained the people from going beyond what had happened. It wasn't meant as a way of saying, well, you've done this, and your eye is forfeit as well. Somebody gets angry because you punched out their brother's eye. They may actually kill the person, or they may punch out both of their eyes. And so the lex talionis, or the eye for eye law, is actually a way of restraining the people, not giving them license. Thank you. Anyway, so,
A quick question,
yes.
Charlie. My question is the capital punishment. What happens to those that they are executed
Innocent.
or innocent, and they find out after they're executed?
Okay, here we go. What happens, and this is the same concept, but a different example. A woman is raped and she gets pregnant. Did God know that that would happen?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's why we don't abort children, is because God, in His sovereignty, allowed that to happen. The person that is hung or shot or whatever, execution, and it was wrong, doesn't negate, it could be a test of our faithfulness. As a society, excuse me, I've slurred that. It could be a test of our faithfulness as a society to continue to carry out proper justice even after we've made mistakes. Okay, that's how I look at that. I haven't read any commentaries on that, but that's how I see that. Is that everything that happens doesn't happen apart from God. He knows that it's going to happen, and therefore it must be something that we are to learn from.
I mean, because that's what they're using.
Oh, sure it is. And it's always the liberals that come up with these things. I'm talking about liberal in thinking about these things. I'm not talking about liberal and conservative, politics. It's the liberal ideology that says, oh, well, what about this and what about this? And they always will try to get their foot into the door to weaken what is already established. Or, as we talked about the Constitution earlier, we have a perfectly good Constitution. The country isn't working because we're not following the Constitution. The country isn't working because we're not adhering to the Word of God. Those are the things that are wrong. It's not the source, it's how the source is being misused. What we
I was just going to say, David, he deliberately killed Uriah for some personal reasons. That was murder.
Yes, that was murder.
God made an exception.
He forgave him, and why?
Because he was a man in his own heart. He had plans for him.
Well, no. The reason why is because David
was remorseful.
Read the 51st Psalm, and in other words,
he also lost his child.
He did lose his child, and the Lord. We're going to get into David, and boy, what a study that's going to be. But the Lord did chastise him, and he also said that the members of your own household are going to come against you, and he told him all the things that are going to happen because of this. But ultimately, David, he was remorseful, and he knew that he had done wrong. Saul, on the other hand, said, well, you didn't show up on time. This guy did. He was always finding a reason to blame somebody else. When David was cast out of Jerusalem by his own son Absalom, and a guy is out there throwing rocks and dust on top of him, right at King David. What's his name? Barzillai the Gileadite, I think. Anyway, I might have the wrong person. But anyway, this guy is out here throwing rocks at him. And Joab, they're all bearing swords, all of his officers and everything, as they're walking out. David is in mourning. He's walking with bare feet, and they're going up the, I believe, the Mount of Olives. And Joab says, let me just go and kill that dog, that flea, whatever. And David says, no. He said, how do I know the Lord didn't ordain him to do this? My son has overthrown me. In other words, David understood that God has a purpose for everything. Everything. And the way that he even said that the terminology is what do you sons of Zeruiah have to do with me? In other words, you're thinking totally differently than the way I think. David thought on a level that God appreciated. And if we can read the Psalms and we can get ourselves to think the way that David thought, then we would be people after God's own heart too. Despite the things we do, despite the crummy things that we do, God would say, I respect, or I don't want to say God respects, but God has favor on an attitude of the heart. And so despite the things that David did, he did them, everything he did was under the right attitude. I can't explain any better than that. He just thought on a different plane than we do. Somebody throws rocks at me, I'm going to either go beat him up, or I'm going to go put nails under his car if he's bigger than me, or I'm going to do something, right? But David didn't think that way. He said, well, God must have ordained this, right? Now, at the end of his life, as he was dying, he said to Solomon, this guy that did these things, don't let his gray head go down to the grave in peace, right? He says, if you know what to do with him, right? And so Solomon gave this guy some terms, and the guy violated the terms, and he ended up forfeiting his life. But David's life was over. David said, you are now the king. You are to execute justice as you see fit. But while David lived, he never took a hand against that guy. And he was in his domain the whole time. So he just thought differently. I don't have the patience that David did as far as things like that. So anyway, that's why David was a man after God's own heart. And that's why when he was confronted with his sins, he said, don't worry, God has not taken his spirit from you. You know, the child will die, as you said, and all these other things. But anyway, David is a real study in understanding the nature of God and how he deals with men that please him. Wow. Anyway, okay, so then we've already read this. I'm just going to go through it. It came to pass when the sun went down, it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch. We talked about that. God is making a one-way covenant. On the same day, we stopped there. Go ahead and read 18.
On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadmonites, and the Hittites, the Perizzites, the
Rephaim.
the Amorites, Canaanites, the Gergesites, and the Jebusites.
Okay, one thing about all these sites is that many times in the conquests, from the time of Moses through the conquest of Joshua, it will list them differently. It'll say 6 of them or 7 of them. And people say, well, that's a contradiction in the Bible. That's an error. It's not a contradiction. It's just who God happens to be focusing on at that time. But anyway, he listed a bunch of them. And if you notice, in verse 20, it said the Hittites. Uriah was a Hittite. So there you go. That's what we were talking about right there. And it shows up couple seconds later. Anyway, what does it say in verse 18? To whose descendants has he given the land? Abram. Okay. Now, is Ishmael a descendant of Abraham? Okay. Is Esau a descendant of Abraham? Okay. Why is it that we, as this church, and Charlie in particular, because it's definitely my doctrine, and most of the people in this church, I know the church as a whole agrees on this, even though if individuals don't. Why is it that we support Israel and not the Muslims for the land of Israel? Why is it?
God chose the second son.
Okay, but that is correct, and so that's the correct answer. I just want to reword it so that everybody understands.
Because they were God's chosen people.
They were God's chosen line of descendants. I want to make it so that everybody understands what you already know completely, because the way you said that is the way I would think it. He is making a choice about divine election, the second son. The second is replacing the first. Yes, Ishmael is a son of Abraham, but he is not the son of promise. Isaac is. Yes, Esau is the son of Israel, but he is not the son, Isaac. He is not the son of promise. Jacob is the son of promise. And that happened before they were even born, when God spoke to the mother Rebekah, right? 2 children in your womb, the younger shall serve the older shall serve the younger. Okay? So this was even before they were born. And this goes all the way down through the Bible. God is choosing a select group of people that will possess the land. And that is why we support Israel. Unless you are, I'm talking in Christian circles now. I'm not talking about Muslims who disagree with that and say that it was Ishmael that was sacrificed on the altar, not Isaac. Okay, they do say that. But you know, the Quran never says that, just so you know. They claim that Ishmael was the one that was sacrificed on the altar, but the Quran doesn't say it. All it says is that a son was sacrificed. So just so you know, this is a teaching that is not substantiatable, if that's a real word, in any way at all. Okay? But now we have, speaking in just Christian circles, we have 2 possibilities. One possibility is that the Jewish people are still the people that inherit the land, or that, what's the other possibility? Talking in Christian circles, not Muslim and the rest of the world. That the church has...
The church has superseded it.
Okay, church has replaced Israel. That's right. That's called replacement theology. In most Reformed theology in general will teach that. Presbyterians, Anglicans, the older denomination, maybe Methodism, I don't know.
Romans is so specific.
Yes, it is, but they will take the same verses and they will read them and say it is so specific. And it's a real debate. I got to tell you what, it's a real debate, because they use those verses in exactly the opposite way, but using them to their benefit. If you were trained originally, that's why I say when you're trained originally in whatever doctrine, that's what you're going to believe. Jehovah's Witnesses believe what they believe because that's the way they were trained, no matter how wrong they are. And that's why when you read the Bible, you have to actually, every time you have to say, where am I wrong in this? Lord, show me where I'm wrong. Because if you're not doing that, you'll never change your mind about anything. And that's why in this class alone, there are 2 or 3 concepts that we will disagree on. Because I look at it one way, you look at it another. And they will use those same verses, and they will justify why the church has replaced Israel. Okay? But the fact is, either one is true or the other is true. We believe in this church that the church has not replaced Israel. That all of the Old Testament promises to Israel are to be fulfilled literally in the people of Israel. Okay, so it says here, to your descendants.
Says,
what?
Your people.
That's another thing. They will have to look at those verses differently. The first thing they will do when it says to your city and your people, to your people in your city, whatever, they believe that those verses are fulfilled. We start with a different starting date than they do. They start with the Edict of King Cyrus, which is in the book of Ezra, I believe. Whereas the what we call dispensationalists, what we believe Israel still has 7 more years, we start with the decree in Nehemiah from King Artaxerxes or Ahasuerus. Okay, so they're starting with a different date. Okay, and they will find things in history, both in the Bible and out of the Bible, to justify why they're picking this date. Okay, so that's why I say if you get those 4 verses wrong, Daniel 9, 24 through 27, everything that you believe about Israel will be based on the church replacing Israel. Everything. And that's why when I say you get to verse 29 and it says, then he will establish a covenant with many. That he is the most important pronoun in the entire Bible for understanding who is being addressed in this verse today. Because if the he is Jesus, then the church replaced Israel. But if the he is the Antichrist, that hasn't happened yet in its future. Right? So that is why there's only one way that's true, either one or the other, but they will find verses to fit what they believe. And it is very hard to get them to see differently. The thing that convinces me is that people 80 and 100 years before Israel went back in the land, said this is what's going to happen, at a time when nobody would have believed it, and sure enough, it happened.